this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, July 5th, 2023, and today we're going to be asking and answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last week. And for those of you who weren't able to catch my midweek roundups while I was in China the last 2 weeks, you can catch those on our Facebook page as well as our podcast version through Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You'll be able to find those two shortened versions of the Midweek Roundup recorded while I was in China. Couldn't get them up live, unfortunately, because of bandwidth issues and VPN issues, but certainly I'm glad that I'm able to share those two episodes with you. So hopefully you get a chance to catch up on what's been happening. We'll touch a little bit on some news coming out after our visit to China the last 2 weeks, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. As we do each week, we take the questions that we talk about here on the Roundup from the news stories we have featured in our newsletter that comes out Monday mornings each week, and that's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting, the name of the company, the consulting business I started back in 2014. And we take that newsletter comes out in a couple different formats, either an email subscription from our website. I'll drop the link in the live chat up from that so you can subscribe if you prefer to get that in your email inbox Monday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern. Or if you get your International Ed News via LinkedIn, there's a LinkedIn version that has well over 1,150 subscribers to date. So really excited about the folks that are getting our news each week through the top SMIE stories that we see each week. So we take those themes that we see developing in the news stories and come up with our questions that we answer here on the Roundup each week. So thanks again for being a part of the conversation, and we'll always encourage your questions and comments during the live chat to make and give us a chance to respond and include those in how we talk about these issues of the day. So first up, what does the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action mean for international education? It was the biggest news story of the week last week when that came down, and the Supreme Court, no surprise really, making a decision to in a very one-sided 6-3 decision. The conservative court has been moving that way anyway in the last few years. So certainly both sides in this case, both Harvard and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, are very selective institutions. The Ivy Leagues, like Harvard, accept less than 4% of their applicants every year nowadays. North Carolina, as one of the more selective flagship institutions and state institutions in the country, accepts 2 in 10 of their applicants each year. So these are two obviously highly selective institutions that have used affirmative action standards in their admissions decision-making process for years, and that has gone basically unchallenged until these lawsuits finally made their way to the Supreme Court. And I guarantee you, and this is the way my hot take on this issue, is that as it impacts international students coming to the United States, I doubt it's going to have that much of an impact on their chances of getting admitted to our country. And there's a few reasons for that. We'll go into that today in this question. Most of the international ed associations have come out against this ruling, and for political reasons, and certainly they have taken that stance and access and equitable access to higher education as one of their guiding principles, and I get that. But I don't think this decision, which has been long in the making, should be a surprise, given the nature of the court. And certainly you're deluded if you don't think these highly selective institutions have figured out ways to include in representing, bringing in a diverse class of candidates to their institutions each year, haven't figured out a way to make diversity and the ways they categorize that, and that is changing it on a lot of campuses, how they categorize diversity. So that is, while there are no quotas that can be set by law, now by decision that there are ways that they can be incorporated, which into a very holistic process that has always been about fine margins at the most selective institutions. There's a couple of articles this week that I'll be dropping the link to. One is a very impassioned one from Andrew Gordon, founder of Diversity Abroad, and his company about the impact on, he thinks, and his company believes, and many in the profession might believe, that a significant number of institutions that send the most students to study abroad are also on the list of the most selective colleges and universities, the very institutions that will be most impacted by the affirmative action decisions. Based on past bans on affirmative action, he says, in California and Michigan, the number of Black and Latino students at selective campuses will drop significantly, hence decreasing the population of available students from these backgrounds to study abroad. So, and the impact of fewer students of color studying abroad, potential to create uniquely isolating experiences from some of the students of color who do go abroad, as they will be most likely to be the only one or one of a few that go abroad. There's going to be challenges in the use of race in awarding study abroad scholarships in terms of how they're awarded. I mean, if you have privately funded scholarships, you can get away with having all the criteria that you want. If it's public money, then it's, there's maybe some challenges down the road. So but I will share Andrew's concern here that on the study abroad side, domestically, it may impact based on those past cases of number of Black and Latino students at selective campuses will be dropping, and those most selective campuses doesn't means at those campuses it may be dropping, but those students may be going to other institutions now, and those institutions may also be encouraging more students to come from diverse backgrounds and have different ways that they can attract them through scholarships, through other means. So there's a lot of, and I do agree that the most selective institutions might be the ones, because they have used race as a criteria for admission. That's not the case at selective institutions that have figured it out and said, well, we're not going to actively make our decisions based on race. We're going to be as race blind as we can. But they factor in other ways of looking at bringing in a diverse applicant pool based on where their high schools are. And that's something that I think a lot of universities in the selective category will do. Is a look at the locations of the students and where they're coming from, and perhaps target certain geographic areas that traditionally are going to be represented by diverse communities, lesser represented groups on their college campuses. So I think there are ways around this, and you're foolish if you think that these institutions haven't thought about that already and haven't put in place these kind of worst case scenario plans for what happens if affirmative action does take place. So these are smart institutions. These are ones that are highly selective for a reason, because of the quality of their education, the quality of their experience, and they have resources that they've been committing to this for years, and probably been thinking, well, this is going to be something that we need to be prepared for. And it's not like this should be coming as a big shock to anybody. If anyone who's been following politics over the last 5-10 years has seen this trend moving towards a more conservative court, based on the appointments that the past administration was able to make. So that institutions that are in that bracket, that most selective institutions that are going to be the ones that relied on race as a criteria for admission, they are now in the boat with most colleges and universities that aren't using race as a criteria for admission, which is the greater majority. And that's the second article that we'll share from the Chronicle. And that indicates that the Supreme Court admissions ruling mainly affects selective colleges. They're a tiny slice of higher education. So, and when we say tiny, we're talking about colleges that accept 20% or less of the institutions. So they, according to, let's go to this most recent data here. Look at the institutions by selectivity shows the few colleges most affected by the Supreme Court ruling that accept 0 to 25%. That is only 68 colleges. So that accept 25% or less of the applicants each year. And undergraduate and the enrollment at those institutions is just over 480,000, just at those 68 institutions in the United States, 2 and 4 year institutions that have selectivity rates below 25%. So that's the sliver, tiny sliver of who we're talking about. My institution, UNLV, we're not in the open category, but we accept 75 to 100% of our students. Next, we're not a community college or open access that way, but 75 to 100% of our applicants are admitted, and we're in that category of, according to the Chronicle. And diversity is, we're fortunate that we're in a part of the country where we already a very diverse area. 30% of our students are Latino, about 28% are whites, 15% Asian, 12% Black, and then 2 to 3% Native American. So we have the diversity already at our campus, and we've not had, and we don't use race as a criteria in admissions. So we're able to accept students from a wide range of diverse areas of the country, geographically and ethnically, according to race. We don't make those decisions. That's just how the ethnic makeup of our campus, and that has a lot to do with the area around our campus itself. A lot of the large flagships in the United States are in more rural regions that are not in big cities that have already diverse populations, so there's less chance that they get fewer students from their immediate region that are going to be in that diversity category that they're after. So when it comes to international students, I look and think very seriously about this, that yes, when it comes to the most selective institutions, the top when you look at the top 25 institutions receiving international students, many of them are in that 68%. That's just nature of the beast. The international students in the greatest numbers apply to the most selective institutions, yes. Not all of them get in, obviously, and they have backup plans for second and third choice and fourth choice that might be outside that top 20 or that 0 to 25% selectivity band. So they still find places. They are at every institution that's within every range of institution within the United States. So, but are those same institutions that want and have that great diversity of international students in terms of their backgrounds, are they all of a sudden now making decisions and not having a plan in place to how they review those students? Some of them might have separate numbers, a total number of international students they wish to bring in each year in their selective classes. So they will come up with criteria to make that 200 of their 1,000 incoming class, if they take 20% international. If 20% of those are international, they'll use the criteria that they have to bring in those students. That's if diversity is one of those criteria that they're looking for, they'll find ways to do that. And they can do that by country, not necessarily by race. So that's an easy way for selective institutions that are probably already doing that to make diversity a priority, if that isn't already, which I'm sure it is, at these most selective institutions. You focus on regions of the world that you want to attract more students from, and then that is if that's a criteria for diversifying your international student population, and if that also matches and meets diversity criteria for your institution and how you count those students, then that will happen. So I think the political blowback against this from the higher ed perspective is typically going to be against the decision by the Supreme Court, but I think the reality on the ground is these colleges are prepared and should have been prepared for this, but the vast majority of colleges weren't using race already as a criteria for admissions, so it's not going to affect them in their day-to-day operations. They'll have ways, and as I mentioned, I've done app reading for private universities in the past, and they had diversity as a priority, but they weren't doing it by race. They were using economic factors and geographic location factors, zip codes, to be able to identify areas that they wanted to grow their enrollments from. So I think there are ways to do this, and I think that's something that gets missed in all the politics on the response to the decision. Most in higher ed will not be happy with this decision because it provided cover for institutions to be able to use that as use race as a factor in how they made decisions. But the reality is there are a lot of ways to increase your diversity. And to just say, "Oh no, we're not going to be able to do anything now because it's not a protected class anymore," that's something that I think is not the reality for the greater majority of institutions. Again, only 68% of the more than 3,000 2- and 4-year colleges that have selectivity rates are going to be impacted by this, and in terms of part of their admissions criteria already. And using race as a criteria for admissions. So a very politicized issue, and my thoughts may be very much outside the mainstream here, but in terms of the reality as it will impact international students coming into the United States, there may well be some challenges if institutions were using race as a factor. But I don't think it's being more politicized than the actual impact will be, because I think those institutions have found ways already to make plans to accommodate for bringing in a more diverse class and figuring out ways to do that don't rely on using race as a criteria. So it's a simple shift in priorities that can still get you to the same goal without it being an explicit criteria for admissions. And Harvard's smart enough, North Carolina's smart enough to have already thought that through. So the big schools will still be selective, and they'll still bring in diverse classes because they have the pick of the best students in the world applying to them. So it's going to from all backgrounds. So I think that this is not a mountain out of a molehill type of an issue, but certainly the real time impact on it will be less than the worst case scenario that most higher ed associations are portraying at this point. So that's enough on that topic. We'll move on to the second topic of the day, and that is, what is the way forward with China and international education? And obviously, I have a little bit of perspective on this, having just returned from 2 weeks in China, my first trip there in 15 years. And it was a very eye-opening one. The country has changed massively in that time. At the last time I was there in 2008, social media was just starting to take off. And it was right before all the Western platforms were just starting to get banned, and the Chinese versions of those were just starting to take off. So it wasn't really a huge shift in that respect. In terms of where it is, that was probably one of the biggest shifts in terms of the social media side and the digitalization of life in China. And that is reflected in a lot of ways in terms of I mentioned during our trip that we were having challenges paying for things, and that was something that was a little unexpected. We kind of had heard from some of our Chinese students who had helped us prep for our trip that China is almost a cashless society now. Everything's done through apps, through Weixin Pay or Alipay. Those are the two main ways that you pay for anything in China now. From buying something at the store, showing your QR code from your Alipay app, to going on a taxi ride like we have with Uber now. You know that your Uber in the U.S., if you take a ride, or Lyft or any of those are tied to rideshare apps. They're tied to a credit card or debit card, so that's automatically coming out. That's all done electronically. Put that on steroids. That's how China is for everything. Even vendors on the street will take Alipay. Gift stores that you go to, tourist shops that you go to, they'll only take Alipay or Weixin Pay. So you realize quickly that if you don't have these things already, you are in a real bind for paying for anything. And unless you're staying at a Western hotel, even you can't pay except by Alipay or Weixin Pay. So, and the added complication has been, and we certainly felt this while we were there, is that Alipay and Weixin Pay, you could only tie debit cards to that. So imagine if you had to pay for a hotel and you only had a debit card to do so. You'd have to have all that money up front that you need to pay for hotels on your Weixin Pay or Alipay account, in your checking account. Debit card, whatever, that's tied to this Alipay to pay for the bigger ticket expenses. There was even problems when we needed to pay one of our university partners had paid for our hotel rooms, and we said no, we need to pay for our hotel rooms. So they had paid for them. Wanted to reimburse them. We couldn't even do that based. If you already have a Chinese bank account, you could have done that person to person within China, but we didn't. So we couldn't use even our debit cards to pay someone for the services that they had given us. It was about $800. So we couldn't pay them directly through Alipay or Weixin Pay because because of the banking regulations that in terms of making payments to people in China, to person to person in China, there are restrictions on how much we can pay. And you can't do that. If we needed to pay $800, we couldn't even break it down into 300 and 300 and 200 or anything like that. We had to have our professor who was from China, who had a Chinese bank account and a Weixin Pay, Alipay. He reimbursed this university partner, and then we reimbursed him. So through Apple Pay. So learning a lot about electronic payments, we certainly encountered a number of roadblocks. And our provost, who was with us on the trip, we made the point to a couple of people as we were having these issues that we really need the Alipay and WePay to Weixin Pay to have features where we can use credit cards through these two payment mechanisms. And we complained to the Ministry of Education, a couple other people, how difficult it was for us to pay for things in China. And part of this is a consequence of what's happened in China for the last 3 years. They have been shut down to the outside world for all wants and purposes. And they are now reopening and starting to see significant traffic I will say, from the time I was in Guangzhou through Wuhan to Yicheng, where we were for the Three Gorges Dam, in those three cities, I was the only Western face, or our group was the only Western faces I saw the entire time. When we would go walking in town to some of the sites, and we'd just get all these stares and wonderment. We'd have little kids coming up to us and asking if they can get their pictures taken with us. I mean, it was really sweet seeing the kids do that, and there was just this wonderment, and it's like, wow. They're outsiders back in our country, and some little kids, they'd never seen anybody from the West visiting their country, or their city. So it was very surprising. Well, obviously, when we got to Beijing, going to some of the more touristy places, we started to see that. So very interesting to capture that interest here. So in terms of what we see a lot of challenges in the future with China on some re-engaging there. And for us at UNLV, it was a first time engaging. We have a couple of minor agreements that our College of Engineering has had that haven't resulted in significant student flows yet. But their hope is now, with these more significant partnerships that we've made with higher ranked universities than we are in China, with Wuhan University, Beijing Normal University, Sun Yat-sen University, where we're going to be sending a group of hospitality students next summer. These trips are meaningful, and they're meaningful in a lot of different ways. And I think these educational exchanges, frankly, are going to be how China really reopens and how we start repairing a lot of the damage done politically over the last 6-7 years. And I think we were certainly seeing a real eagerness to re-engage from the Chinese side. Even with one university that's more of a natural peer for us, they were very anxious and eager to start working on joint programs and re-engaging. And so for us, it was eye-opening, and for me, refreshing to see that. That I asked at each stop along the way, hey, have you had any other U.S. senior delegations visit you since the pandemic? And they all said, no, you're the first. They've had maybe a couple of them had Australian delegations visit. Maybe one had a British university, but we were the first U.S. institution coming back. So that means a lot, first back in. And we are putting ourselves in a positive position as an institution because we took the gamble of going earlier than perhaps most have. So I think we're starting to see significant traction in China and interest in China and re-engaging. Ours is a multi-level strategy for student enrollments. Certainly there's going to be study abroad going trips to China that we'll be initiating with our new partners. There's going to be more flows coming to us that we're working through agents, working through universities and colleges in China that are looking for 2+2s. We have a couple of 3+1s already in existence, looking at some other options for 3+1+1 postgrad programs. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think we're in a good position at UNLV. And there's an article here from the South China Morning Post that I'll drop in as well that does say that after Secretary of State Blinken, he made a recent trip to China a week before we got there to kind of restart the positive direction of U.S.-China relations. So one area that he discussed with his counterparts in China was the importance of educational exchanges, and a number of institutions are starting to get that. And Chinese institutions are certainly being encouraged to re-engage and explore new options as well. So I think the table is set for a restart to these to relations with China, and on the university level, that can certainly jumpstart what happens on the political level. So, or be facilitated by at least a warming of relations. Certainly not completely open yet, but we are going to see some changes coming, and one of those changes is that there are now moves by the folks who run Tencent, and that's the Weixin Pay, WeChat Pay. That they can link credit cards issued by Visa to their WeChat app starting next month. And that will help them pay for hotel rooms using a credit card. This comes after MasterCard announced last week that cardholders can link credit or debit cards to the Alipay digital wallet so they can finally pay like a local. So that is something that the Ant Group Ant Group owns Alipay. WeChat Pay is owned by Tencent Holdings. So that is a brighter future for those looking to go back to China. Pretty soon you will have that ability to pay through credit card using WeChat Pay or Alipay. But you'll have to do that, get that set up before you leave. That's one thing that you really need to focus on before you go on that trip. Make sure you have that set up. The last quick thing, I will give a shout out to my friends at INTED. For those who know me, one of the founding principles of SMIE is social media and international ed. And social media management is something I've been practicing since I was at Ball State when I was starting when social media was just taking off in the mid-noughties. And that became a regular part of my job there, and using that tool to reach prospective students. When I joined in at Education USA, I found Hootsuite. And Hootsuite has been with me a major reason I've been successful and with my company and with my social media content, with these newsletters, is you see these kinds of issues percolating up. And for me, this is really important because this INTED article reflects what I've been talking about for years about Hootsuite and how valuable it is in terms of managing all the content that you have on social media, through monitoring how your name is being used out there in the marketplace, through mentions, scheduling, team collaboration, data analytics, targeting ads, running campaigns. So there's a whole suite of things that Hootsuite can do. I had the pleasure of meeting the founder and at their headquarters in Vancouver during the NAFSA conference in 2009 or 2010 or 11. So it was really eye-opening for me, and certainly a trip that I will always remember. It's been with part of my social media life for almost 12 years now, so 12, 13 years. So, but check out this article from INTED that talks about the value of Hootsuite and how it can really help institutions expand their footprints with social media and minimize the amount of time that they're having to dedicate to it in terms of the planning and the implementation. Those that get the newsletter each week, every story that's in that newsletter also gets scheduled as a social media post out for the following week. So that's I do that 3 or 4, up to 5, 6, 7 articles a day get posted on using Hootsuite, scheduled at times where I know I get the most impact and responses and engagement from readers. So there's a lot of positives through using Hootsuite, and I certainly encourage you all to check it out. So that's all we have for you this week, and until next time, wish you